The sunlight coming through my kitchen window felt softer that morning, almost gentle, as if it knew I was carrying news that could change my son's entire life. I had just inherited $38 million, and for the first time in years, I felt hopeful. I grabbed my keys, rehearsing how I would tell him, imagining his smile, imagining relief in his voice. But before I ever reached his driveway, everything changed. A crash, a hospital, a silence I never expected. If you're watching this, please like the video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. I remember that morning clearly because nothing felt wrong. I woke up with a kind of lightness I hadn't felt in years, the sort of feeling that comes when life finally hands you something kind instead of another problem to carry. I made myself a small breakfast, humming while I cooked, thinking about how shocked my son would be when I told him the news. For once, I thought I could give him something big, something life-changing, something that would wipe away all the stress he always talked about. I imagined his face brightening, imagined him hugging me the way he did when he was a little boy, imagined him saying, "Mom, we're going to be okay now." I held on to that picture like a gift. I dressed slowly, choosing a soft sweater my sister once bought for me. It still carried her scent in tiny traces I liked to pretend were still there. She had only been gone a month, and my heart still tightened every time I thought of her. Losing her felt like losing a part of my history, a part of my youth, a part of myself that only she understood. And yet, she left me something so enormous, so unexpected, that I still woke up some mornings unsure if it was real. $38 million. I said the number out loud once, just to feel the weight of it. It didn't feel like money. It felt like responsibility, like trust, like a final message from her saying, "Live the life you never could because of everything you sacrificed." I decided that morning that I would give my son some of it, maybe a house, maybe a business, maybe enough to erase every bill he had. I didn't plan details. I only planned the moment I would see him smile again. I wanted that moment more than anything. I wanted to feel needed, appreciated, included. I wanted to feel like a mother giving her child something meaningful. That soft hope carried me as I gathered my purse, my keys, and the envelope holding the legal documents proving everything was already in my name. I placed that envelope gently in the passenger seat as if it were another living thing. Driving usually made me tense, but that day I drove with ease. I played an old radio station, let the cold air brush through the cracked window, and allowed myself to imagine what Christmas would look like with this new future. Maybe I would fly the family somewhere warm. Maybe we'd finally repair the distance that had grown so quietly over the years. I knew my son had been more distant since his wife entered the picture, but I tried not to blame anyone. Families evolve, I told myself. Children grow up, they get busy, they get distracted, they forget little things like calling their mother or checking in. I convinced myself the space between us was normal, even if it never felt normal inside my chest. But that day, I pushed all doubts away. I told myself everything would change once he knew. Everything. That belief was the only thing that mattered as I made that turn onto the long road leading out of town. Then, in one blink, my life shifted. A truck swerved, tires screeched, the world tilted, metal screamed, glass flew. The sound was deafening, but the silence after was worse. When I woke up, I wasn't on the road anymore. I was staring at fluorescent lights in a hospital room, with a tube taped to my arm and bruises forming across my ribs. I remember asking the nurse softly, "Did anyone call my son?" She nodded. She said they left him voicemails, that he hadn't responded. At first I told myself he must not have heard the message. He must be at work, or sleeping, or driving. I defended him automatically, the way mothers do without thinking. I watched the clock as hours passed. When night came, I still told myself not to worry. When the next day came and he still didn't show, I felt something in me begin to shift. Not anger, not sadness, just a quiet ache that spread slowly through my chest. The nurses checked on me with gentle smiles. One even said, "Maybe tomorrow, sweetheart. Give him time." I wanted to believe her, but by the third day, when my phone still showed nothing, no missed calls, no messages, I knew he wasn't coming. Not because he didn't know, but because seeing me, helping me, showing up for me simply wasn't important to him anymore. The truth sank in slowly, like cold water rising around my feet. I lay there in that bed, staring at the blank wall, and realized the distance I had felt for years wasn't me imagining things. It was real, and it had been growing silently, steadily, while I kept making excuses for him. Everything felt normal that morning, calm, hopeful, warm. But by the time I opened my eyes in that hospital bed, the world I believed I still had was already gone. The first thing I noticed when I truly woke up in that hospital bed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that wraps around you and presses on your chest until you realize it's not silence at all. It's absence. I kept glancing toward the door, expecting it to open at any second, expecting to see my son step in with rushed footsteps, worried eyes, and maybe even guilt for not coming sooner. I pictured him bringing flowers, perhaps a jacket, maybe even a cup of soup, because he knew hospitals always felt too cold for me. I kept imagining these little things because they were the motions any child with even an ounce of love left in them would go through. But the door stayed closed. Hours passed like slow rain. A nurse checked my vitals, adjusted my pillows, and tried to make small talk. I asked her again if she had called my son. She nodded with a look I recognized, the look people give when they know something you don't want to hear. She said quietly, "We left him 2 messages, one this morning, one last night." I thanked her even though my stomach clenched. I tried to smile back, but even the act of smiling felt heavy. The room was filled with flowers, none of them from my son. They were from my sister's old friends, from neighbors who heard what happened, from people who cared just because kindness was their nature. Every card had warm words, hopeful words, but none of the handwriting belonged to the boy I raised, and that detail began to sting more than the broken ribs. I reached for my phone on the side table. No messages, no missed calls, not even a simple, "Are you okay?" I told myself he must not have checked his phone. He must have been busy. But even as I said it internally, the lie felt ridiculous. Even a stranger would check on me faster than he had. The next day, a nurse walked in with her tablet, updating my chart. She said, "Your son hasn't returned any of our calls. Do you want us to try again?" My heart tightened. I nodded. She stepped out to make the call right there at the station, her voice low, but still clear enough that I could make out bits of the conversation. "Yes, this is the hospital. We've been trying to reach you. It's urgent regarding your mother." And then, after a long pause, she said quietly, "I understand. Thank you." When she returned, she didn't meet my eyes at first. That's how I knew. She said softly, "He said he can't talk right now. He's busy. He'll call when he's free." Busy. My only child. Busy. I looked down at my hands, bruised and shaking, and wondered how a lifetime of love could end on a word like that. I remembered the nights I stayed awake sewing costumes for his school plays, the mornings I skipped meals so he could take lunch to school, the afternoons I walked 3 miles to pick him up because the bus stop felt unsafe. I remembered every birthday cake, every fever I stayed up nursing, every sacrifice I made without ever calling it a sacrifice. And now, after an accident that could have taken my life, all he had for me was, "I'm busy." The next day was worse, because on that day, I saw him online. I saw photos of him and his wife at brunch, smiling, holding mimosas. She posted a caption, "Finally relaxing weekend, no stress, no stress." Meanwhile, the bones in my chest ached every time I breathed. My stitches pulled when I reached for my water, my legs trembled when I tried to sit up. But they were stress-free. It was the first moment I truly let the truth settle inside me. The truth was not that he didn't care about my accident. It wasn't that he was overwhelmed or distracted. The truth was far simpler and far crueler. Helping me wasn't convenient, and my son had grown into a man who cared only for convenience. When the doctor came in, he asked who would be picking me up when I got discharged. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Because I didn't know. Because the one person I expected never showed, never asked, never even pretended. So I tried calling him myself. My hands were shaking a little as I pressed the number I had memorized for decades. He answered on the third ring, and before I could even speak, he sighed loudly. "What now, Mom?" Not, "How are you?" Not, "Are you okay?" Just exhaustion, annoyance, like I was interrupting something important. I told him softly, "I'm still in the hospital." Before I could finish, he cut me off. "Mom, I don't have time for this. You're fine, right? They said you were fine. Stop worrying me over nothing." Then he hung up. Just like that. I stared at the phone for a long time, listening to the dial tone echo in my chest. That was the moment the world around me shifted, not because of the crash, but because of his words. I realized the accident hadn't broken me. My son had. And yet, he had no idea that everything he dismissed, everything he ignored, every moment he didn't show up, was being watched. And soon, he would understand exactly what that meant. The day I finally gathered the strength to call my son again felt heavier than the accident itself. I sat up in my hospital bed, still bruised, still moving carefully, but clear-headed enough to know I needed to hear his voice one more time, if only to understand where I truly stood in his life. I pressed his number, hoping for something different, something human, something warm. When he picked up, his voice was already irritated before I even spoke. That alone told me everything I needed to know. I said softly, "It's me. I just wanted to—" He cut me off instantly. "Mom, what now? I told you I'm busy. I don't have time for this." His tone wasn't rushed or overwhelmed. It was annoyed, sharp, cold, like a stranger being bothered by telemarketing calls. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, feeling the bruises on my ribs throb in rhythm with his words. My throat tightened, and for a moment I couldn't speak. I wanted to ask him why he didn't come. I wanted to ask him if he remembered who raised him, but before I could gather the courage, he snapped again. "Mom, I swear, if this is about the car or the hospital bills, deal with it. I have things going on. Deal with it." Those 3 words settled into my chest like a weight I wasn't prepared to carry. I wasn't calling about bills. I wasn't calling about the crash. I was calling because I nearly died, and he didn't care. I was calling because I was lonely, because I wanted, needed my child. But he didn't leave room for any of that. Instead, he said something that stunned even the nurse standing beside me. "Mom, don't make everything dramatic. You're fine. I don't have time for this." Then he hung up, just like that. Quick, clean, cruel. For a few seconds I held the phone to my ear, listening to nothing but empty air. My fingers shook. My heart felt like it folded in on itself. I didn't expect him to drop everything and camp by my bedside, but a simple, "Are you okay?" would have saved me from days of wondering if he cared at all. Instead, the silence he left me with was louder than any pain from the crash. The nurse beside me placed a hand on my arm. Her eyebrows were raised, her mouth slightly open. She had heard the entire call, not on purpose, but because his voice was loud enough to fill the room. She murmured, He doesn't know what he just threw away." At first, I didn't understand what she meant. I assumed she was talking about emotional support, about basic decency. But she glanced at the stack of papers on my bedside table, The legal documents, the inheritance records, the notarized files outlining the $38 million that had become mine just weeks earlier. She knew. She knew exactly what he had just lost. Her expression said everything. He hung up on the fortune he didn't even know existed. And more than that, he hung up on the one person who would have given it to him without thinking twice. I leaned back against the pillows, my breath shaky and shallow. The realization spread through me slowly. If this was how he treated me when he thought I was poor and helpless, what would he do if he knew I was wealthy? If he knew I had the power to change his life with a single phone call? That thought scared me more than the accident. I imagined him rushing to my bedside the moment he learned about the inheritance, bringing flowers, acting devastated, crying on command, pretending to care. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a cold truth settled. The only time my son would come running was if there was something to gain. The nurse checked my IV, her voice gentle. "You deserve better than that, dear." I didn't reply, because she was right, but knowing that didn't make it hurt less. It didn't erase the memory of raising him alone, sacrificing everything, believing that love would be returned someday. I stared at the ceiling and asked myself the question every mother avoids. How long had he stopped loving me? It wasn't sudden. I knew that deep down. It was a slow shift, a slow distancing, missed calls, short visits, fewer hugs, even fewer "I love yous." He didn't stop overnight. He faded away over time until I barely recognized the man I had once carried in my arms. The crash didn't break me. His voice did. His indifference did. His impatience did. And the moment he hung up that phone, something inside me finally settled into place. Not anger, not revenge, not yet, but clarity. Clarity that he didn't see me as a mother anymore. Clarity that his wife didn't see me as family. Clarity that their life didn't include me unless I was useful. Clarity that the love I spent years giving had turned into a burden they didn't want. But the thing he didn't know, the thing that changed everything, was that he wasn't the only one listening during that call. Someone else had been watching, someone who knew more than he ever imagined. And soon, they would make sure he understood exactly what he had done. I sat there in the hospital bed long after the call ended, staring at the wall as if the paint could explain how a child I raised with my own hands had grown into someone who couldn't spare a moment for me. And as I sat there, something inside me pulled backward, pulling me into memories I hadn't visited in years. It wasn't nostalgia, it wasn't longing, it was clarity. The kind of clarity that comes only after pain hits you hard enough to wake up parts of yourself you forgot you had. I thought back to the early years, when life was simple but hard. I remembered standing in long supermarket lines counting coins twice because even $1 mattered. I remembered cooking small meals and stretching leftovers into something new because my son was a growing boy who needed to eat. I remembered walking to work in the rain so he could have bus money for school. I remembered sewing patches on his clothes at midnight so other children wouldn't make fun of him. Every memory I had of him was tied to sacrifice, to love, to giving. And then I remembered my sister, my older sister, the one with the sharp mind, the firm voice, and the quiet wealth no one ever talked about. She didn't brag, she didn't show off. She lived simply, even though she owned businesses, real estate, and investments that reached far beyond what our family ever imagined. When she passed, she left everything to me. Not because she didn't love others in the family, but because she trusted me. She trusted I wouldn't waste the fortune she worked so hard for. She trusted I would use it wisely. She trusted I would protect it. She trusted me more than my own child did. I remembered the day the lawyer handed me the inheritance files. Page after page of assets, accounts, and legal documents, each one confirming that she had named me her sole heir. $38 million. 38 million in neat, quiet numbers hidden from the world. When I walked out of that office with those papers in my bag, I felt like I was carrying the weight of a secret that could change everything. But I held it close. I didn't tell anyone, not even my son, not because I didn't trust him, but because I wanted to tell him in a special way. Face to face, warmly, as a gift, not a transaction. I wanted to look into his eyes and tell him that he didn't have to work himself to exhaustion anymore, that he and his wife could relax, that their dreams could finally be within reach, that life was about to get easier. I imagined the relief on his face. I imagined him hugging me the way he used to. I imagined sharing joy, not money. But sitting in that hospital room after hearing his voice filled with irritation and distance, I realized something painful. I had been holding on to a dream that lived only in my head. The boy I remembered, the one who used to run to me with open arms, had disappeared years ago. The man who replaced him spoke to me like an obligation, a chore, a burden. I thought back to how he changed after getting married, the calls that stopped, the visits that got shorter, the way his wife always looked at me like I was taking up space, how she gently, but persistently, asked questions about my finances. Do you have retirement savings? Are you managing okay? Do you have a will? At the time, I thought she was just showing concern. I didn't see the calculations behind her eyes. I didn't see the gears turning. But now, after learning they had taken loans in my name, it all made sense. They didn't come to the hospital because they cared. They didn't call because they missed me. They didn't check on me because they were worried. They stayed away because they had already decided I was worth nothing to them. I felt a heaviness drag across my chest as I remembered a specific moment 2 years earlier when my son rushed me off the phone after I asked if he could help fix the fence. "Mom, I can't deal with this right now," he said. That same afternoon, I saw photos online of him and his wife enjoying cocktails by the pool. I pushed that memory aside back then, but now it made sense. Every ignored birthday, every canceled holiday, every rushed conversation, every "Mom, not now," every "Mom, you'll be fine." They weren't signs of a busy life. They were signs of fading love. And the cruelest part of all, the day I crashed my car, I wasn't rushing for myself. I was rushing to bring them good news. I tightened my grip on the inheritance papers on my bedside table. $38 million. Money that could change lives. Money that could save futures. Money that could heal old wounds. But money in the wrong hands could destroy everything. My son didn't know what I had. But soon, he would learn the truth. Not through joy, not through celebration, not through gratitude. He would learn because his own actions would place him directly on the wrong side of everything I had built. And when that moment came, I would not hesitate. When I finally returned home from the hospital, moving slowly and carefully, I expected a quiet house and nothing more. I didn't expect comfort or help from my son or his wife anymore. I had already accepted that. But what I didn't expect was the feeling that someone had been watching me, not in a dramatic way, not in a movie-like way. It was subtle, small things that someone else might ignore. But a mother knows when something is wrong. A woman who has lived a long life knows when eyes are on her. It started with a message from my neighbor, an older woman who sits on her porch every day. She told me that someone had been parking outside my house late at night. A black car. No one got out. No one knocked. It just sat there, engine off, lights off, for hours. At first I brushed it aside. Maybe someone was lost. Maybe someone needed quiet. But the next night, it returned. And the night after. My neighbor said the car left only when I turned on my living room lights. Then the calls began. Unknown numbers. No voicemail. No voice when I answered. Just silence. Slow breathing. Then the click of someone hanging up. At first I thought it was spam, but then they came more often. Early morning, late night, midday, The phone wouldn't stop. I could feel something tightening around me, like someone somewhere had decided I suddenly mattered, and that scared me more than the accident ever did. I started paying more attention online, too. My daughter-in-law posted almost everything on social media: their vacations, their dinners, their outfits, their arguments, their frustrations. She posted everything, except their financial struggles. But I saw the cracks. I saw the stress on her face, the comments from friends asking why they weren't going on that trip anymore, the subtle panic hidden behind her constant need to look perfect. And then she began liking posts about inheritance laws, elder care, and how to legally access a parent's estate. Posts about gaining control of someone else's finances. Posts about removing unfit elders from managing money. She didn't know I saw them, but I did. And every like was a confession. My banker called next, his voice low, careful, testing the waters. He told me someone had been trying to access my accounts. Someone had called pretending to be me, saying they lost their voice and needed urgent access. Someone had tried to sign into my online banking 3 times from another city. Someone had requested updated identification details on my file. And when he said someone, we both knew who. I drove to the bank the next morning with my neck still stiff from the accident. My banker showed me printed copies of the attempted requests. I saw my name forged, my address scribbled, my signature, except it wasn't mine. It was my daughter-in-law's handwriting, perfectly copied, smooth and practiced. I stared at the paper for a long time, not angry, not shocked, just numb. This was not care. This was not love. This was desperation, the kind of desperation that turns people into predators. I realized then that they hadn't avoided me because they were busy. They avoided me because they thought I might die, quietly, conveniently, and leave everything behind. And if I didn't die on my own, maybe they hoped I would let go enough for them to use the law against me. The calls, the parked car, the forged documents, her online searches. It all pointed to one thing. They were watching me because they needed access to something they thought they deserved, something they had assumed they would get naturally, something they thought they could push me toward if they just ignored me long enough. My accident didn't scare them. What scared them was the fact that I survived it. I watched their life from a distance, like someone watching a storm form slowly over the horizon. Their business was failing. Information I learned from a friend of a friend who worked at the bank they used. They took out loans they couldn't repay. They bought luxuries they couldn't afford. They acted rich, using money that wasn't theirs. And now they were drowning. And drowning people don't look for help. They look for someone to stand on. They thought I was that someone. They thought I was the weak link. They thought I was the easy path to money that didn't belong to them. But they didn't know about the inheritance. They didn't know about the $38 million. They didn't know about the estate files locked in my safe. They didn't know about the lawyer who called me weekly. They didn't know about the protections my sister had put in place. And they didn't know that I already knew everything they were trying to do. They thought they were circling me quietly. But I was watching them too. And unlike them, I was patient, careful, prepared. A storm was coming, but it wasn't going to hit me. It was going to hit them. When the dust finally settled around my recovery and the house felt normal again, I knew I had to make one last attempt to reach my son. Not because I expected warmth, but because I needed to hear the truth from his own mouth. I wanted to give him a chance to simply be honest, to be human, to be the boy I raised, even if just for a moment. I dialed his number with slow hands, steady breaths, and an open heart that was already halfway closed. The call rang only twice before he answered, and his voice hit me like cold water, sharp, impatient, almost irritated that I existed. "Yeah? What is it now?" he said, like I was a telemarketer calling him during dinner. For a second, I didn't speak. I just listened to the tone, hoping I was wrong, that he was stressed, distracted, anything other than what he sounded like. I tried to keep my voice calm as I asked if he could come visit, or at least talk for a few minutes. I told him I was still recovering from the accident, that I had things I wanted to share with him, things he would want to hear if he just paused long enough to listen. He let out a long, annoyed sigh. "Mom, are you still on that? You're fine now. Stop dragging this out." Dragging this out. The words settled somewhere deep in my chest like stones. I tried again, softer this time. I told him I had important news, good news, news that could change everything for him, for his life, for his family. But he cut me off before I could even say another sentence. "Look, I don't have time for this. I've got real problems to deal with. Call me later." Then silence. Then the click. I held the phone to my ear long after the line went dead, not because I expected him to return, but because the echo of his voice stung more with every second that passed. I stared at the wall in front of me, letting the truth sink in slowly, painfully, like a bruise blooming under the skin. For years I had told myself that he was busy, that he was stressed, that life was pulling him in many directions. I excused every forgotten birthday, every ignored message, every missed holiday. I told myself he cared. He was just overwhelmed. But in that moment, with his voice still lingering in the air, I realized that it wasn't life pulling him away. It was choice, his decision, his priority list. And I wasn't on it. I sat down on the edge of my bed, the place where I had nursed him through fevers, where I folded his little clothes, where he once climbed up just to sleep beside me when thunderstorms scared him. I looked around at the room that held decades of memories of him, his drawings still in a drawer, his baby blanket in a box I could never throw away, the photo of us at the beach when he was 6 and begged me to build sandcastles with him. How did we get here? How did a boy who once needed me for everything grow into a man who couldn't give me a single afternoon? The more I thought about it, the more the truth sharpened in my mind. It wasn't the accident that had shaken me. It wasn't the hospital, or the loneliness, or the silence of that long, cold room. It was knowing that my near death meant nothing to him, that my survival was an inconvenience, not a relief, that he had grown into someone who only saw my existence through the lens of his own needs. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask what the good news was. He didn't ask how I felt or how I was healing. He didn't even ask if I needed anything. He only asked why I was still bothering him. And that was the moment something inside me snapped, not in anger, not in rage, but in clarity. The clarity that comes when a mother finally accepts the truth she's been avoiding. I realized I wasn't calling my son to talk. I wasn't calling him for support. I wasn't calling him for connection. I was calling him out of habit. He was no longer the boy I raised. He was no longer the person I once trusted with my heart and hopes. He was a man who saw me as a weight he didn't want to carry, a man who believed my problems were interruptions, a man who treated me as something he could pick up or drop depending on his mood. And the saddest part wasn't losing him. It was realizing I had already lost him long before the accident. When the call ended, it felt like a door closing. A final, heavy, echoing door that locked from the other side. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't collapse. I just sat there, breathing in the truth, letting it wash over me until my heartbeat steadied. That night, I understood something important. I wasn't healing from broken bones. I was healing from a broken relationship. I was healing from years of giving love that was never returned. And from that moment forward, everything inside me shifted. This wasn't a son anymore. This was a warning. After that final phone call with my son, something in me settled. Not anger, not revenge, but a deep, steady calm. A kind of clarity that only comes when you finally stop lying to yourself about the people you love. I realized I had been waiting for him to show me something, anything, that proved he still cared. I had been clinging to memories, not reality. And once that truth settled, I stopped reaching for him. Instead, I started reaching for answers. Answers to questions I should have asked a long time ago. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and a pen, determined to understand why he and his wife had suddenly shown interest in me only after the accident. Something wasn't right. My instincts, sharpened by age, betrayal, and motherhood, kept telling me there was more beneath the surface. Mothers feel these things. We sense danger before we see it. And something inside me whispered that my son's distance wasn't just neglect, it was strategy. So I began with the easiest step, checking my own accounts. I opened my laptop, logged into my bank, and felt a coldness crawl over my skin. There were transactions I didn't recognize, small ones, irregular ones, withdrawals made from locations I had never visited. I scrolled back months, then a year, more unexplained charges. I felt my hands tighten around the mouse. Whoever had taken this money didn't think I would ever look, or maybe they thought I wouldn't understand what I was looking at. I called my banker, someone who had known me for over 20 years. When he answered, he sounded concerned immediately, asking if I was all right after the accident. That alone brought more comfort than anything my son had said. I asked about the charges. There was a long pause on the line, a very long pause. Then he said gently, "Mrs. Harris, there have been attempts to access your credit line too, but the signatures didn't match. We suspected fraud." My stomach dropped. Whose signature? Who had tried to open credit under my name? I drove to the bank in person because I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. The banker brought out the printed documents, applications, transfers, requests for credit increases. When he set them in front of me, my breath caught in my throat. The signature wasn't mine, but I recognized it instantly. My daughter-in-law's handwriting, her looping S's, her slanted N's, the way she dotted her I's with a tiny curve on the end. A signature I'd seen in every birthday card she'd ever handed me. The room around me blurred for a moment. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shocked. I felt something worse. Confirmation. The kind that hits like a slow punch to the gut. Suddenly, every strange thing she had said in the last year connected like pieces of a puzzle. "Are you sure you want to live alone in such a big house? You should trust family with your accounts. You won't need much when you're older. It's smart to let us handle things, Mom." Smart for who? Certainly not for me. I thanked the banker, took copies of the documents, and headed home. But I wasn't done. The accident had left me with time to think, and thinking led to one final suspicion, one that made my skin prickle with unease. Why had my son and his wife suddenly shown up together after weeks of silence? Why now? Why the forced smiles and fake concern? Why arrive only when I was back on my feet, moving, thinking, digging? I searched my phone for the unknown numbers that had called me earlier that week. I typed one into Google, a private investigation agency. My heart thudded once, heavy, slow, final. They hadn't come to check on me. They had come to check on the inheritance they thought I might have. Then another thought hit me, sharp, sudden, terrifying in its clarity. They didn't know about the $38 million, but they suspected something existed. That explained everything. The debt, the sudden interest, the cold tone, the surveillance, the signature, the rushed visit. They weren't concerned about losing me in that accident. They were concerned about losing whatever money they thought I had hidden. When I realized this, something inside me hardened forever. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in self-preservation. The kind that forms when a mother who has given everything finally sees the truth in plain daylight. My son didn't worry about my life. He worried about my money. He worried about losing access to something that was never his to begin with. So I made decision. A quiet one. A firm one. Before I told them anything, I would protect myself. I would protect the fortune my sister entrusted me with. and I would protect the part of my heart that still believed he might change. They wanted to investigate me? Fine. But they didn't expect me to investigate them back, and what I found would change everything. I knew the knock was coming long before it happened. People like my son and his wife don't disappear quietly when money is at stake. They circle, they wait, they watch for weakness. So when I heard the sound on my front door, a frantic, hurried knocking, I didn't rush. I simply set down my cup of tea, smoothed the blanket over my lap, and waited for the knocking to come again, louder this time. It did, exactly as I expected. I opened the door slowly, just enough to see their faces. They weren't calm, they weren't collected, they weren't here out of love. Their smiles were too wide, too forced, the kind of smiles people wear when they're trying to convince you of something you already know isn't true. My son looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot. His wife clutched her handbag like it contained her entire life inside it. She probably feared it did. "Oh, good, you're awake," she said, her voice sweet, her eyes sharp. They walked in without waiting for me to invite them, scanning the living room like inspectors again. I didn't offer them a seat. I just watched them wander, pretending to admire things they had ignored for years. Then her eyes landed on the table, the documents, the bank statements, the inheritance paperwork, the proof of fraud, all laid neatly in a stack, right where I intended her to see them. I didn't say a word. I simply watched her expression change. First curiosity, then confusion, then recognition, and then fear. It spread across her face slowly, draining every bit of color from her cheeks. She stepped back slightly, as if the papers themselves were alive. My son looked from her to me, confused but trying to hide it with a weak laugh. "Mom, we just came to see how you're doing. You know, after everything. We were worried." Every word was a lie, and we all knew it. He kept glancing at his wife, trying to understand why she had gone stiff beside the table. She whispered, "My God." She knew. Her voice cracked on the last word. It echoed around the room, louder than she intended. My son froze. He looked at her sharply. "What do you mean she knew?" His voice rose with panic, real panic, not the fake concern he brought to my porch. He grabbed one of the papers without reading the heading first. His face fell when he saw his wife's forged signature right there in black ink. He dropped the paper like it had burned him. His wife slowly backed away from the table, staring at me as if I were someone entirely different than the woman she thought she could manipulate. "You saw all of this," she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was dread. It was realization. It was the moment she understood the game was over. I finally spoke, calmly, evenly. "I saw everything, and I made sure the right people saw it too." She gasped. My son stepped toward me, his voice breaking. "Mom, wait, this is all a misunderstanding." I lifted my hand and he fell silent. For the first time in many years, he saw me. Not the soft mother he ignored, not the easy target, not the woman he thought would always forgive him, but someone who had finally opened her eyes. "You didn't come here because you care," I said. "You came here because you were afraid I survived." No yelling, no tears, just truth. He swallowed hard. His wife looked like she might collapse. And then, little by little, their masks began to fall. First came the excuses, weak, desperate explanations that contradicted each other. Then came the blame, his wife accusing him accusing her, both trying to rewrite the last year in a matter of seconds. Then came the begging, pleas for understanding, claims of stress, panic about finances, but not one single word about my well-being. Not one word about love. Not one word of regret for leaving me alone in a hospital bed. Their panic grew when they finally saw the last page on the table, my attorney's signature. Legal notices, warnings, boundaries, protections, everything they feared wrapped neatly in a manila folder, My daughter-in-law's voice shook as she backed toward the door. She knew. She knew all along. She repeated it under her breath, like a confession, like an admission of defeat. My son looked lost, like a child who finally realized the world had consequences. But I wasn't done. I stepped closer, not threatening, but firm. I gave you every chance to show me love. You chose money every single time, and now you think you can fix it because you're scared? No, not anymore. They stood in my doorway, trembling, silent, cornered by their own choices. For the first time, they understood they couldn't charm or scare or guilt their way out of this. This wasn't a confrontation. This was revelation. And the truth was standing right in front of them, holding the door open, not to let them in, but to let them out. When they finally left, they didn't slam the door. They didn't shout. They simply walked away in stunned silence, realizing the one thing neither of them expected. I hadn't lost control. I had simply stopped giving it to them. The door had barely clicked shut behind them when the next phase of their panic began. They didn't even make it halfway down my walkway before the shouting started. Through the window, I watched my son turn on his wife, demanding answers, demanding explanations, demanding to know how deep she'd gone behind his back. She snapped back, blaming him, blaming me, blaming anyone except herself. It was all falling apart, and they knew it. They had walked into my home thinking they would find an old, lonely woman eager to cling to them. Instead, they found the truth laid out on my table like a mirror they could no longer avoid. I didn't chase them. I didn't need to. Everything they feared was already in motion. My attorney had filed fraud claims. My bank had flagged every suspicious transaction. The inheritance had been secured under legal protection. Their access to anything connected to me had been severed cleanly. By the time they reached the car, my son's phone buzzed. I could see his face twist as he read whatever message appeared, maybe from the bank, maybe from the lawyer, maybe from the credit company now alerted to activity in my name. His wife grabbed his arm, demanding to know what the text said. He jerked away from her, and for a brief moment, they looked like two people drowning in a storm they had created for themselves. I sat back down in my chair, quiet, steady. There was no joy in watching them panic, no satisfaction in their fear. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. This was the universe returning everything they had put into it. This was them finally facing a reality they thought they could avoid by ignoring me, by dismissing me, by treating me like someone who could be thrown away when convenient. A few minutes later, my door began to shake again, not from knocking this time, but from pounding. My son's voice, frantic and desperate, broke through the wood. "Mom, please, we need to talk. Please open the door." He said, "Please," but there was no softness in it. It was fear, fear of losing the inheritance they didn't know existed until moments ago, fear of the legal trouble they now clearly understood, fear of realizing that everything they assumed would fall in their laps was now locked behind doors they couldn't open. I didn't answer. My daughter-in-law's voice came next, completely different from the smug, sharp tone she'd always used with me. It trembled, cracked, pleaded. "We didn't mean to upset you. It was stress. You know how life gets. We love you. We really do." But even in her begging, she didn't ask about my accident. She didn't ask about my pain. She didn't ask if I needed help. The only thing she mentioned was fixing things and making sure everything is fair. Fair, her favorite word when she meant control. I let them talk themselves in circles on the porch. The more desperate they became, the clearer their intentions were. My son begged for forgiveness, like a man begging for money, not reconciliation. He spoke about families staying together, but his words were hollow. There was no regret in them, only panic. Eventually, my daughter-in-law broke down completely, crying into her hands, not because she lost a mother figure, but because she lost a fortune she had mentally spent 1,000 different ways. "We need you," she said, voice shaking. "We made mistakes. We can fix this." But they weren't sorry for what they had done. They were sorry it had consequences. There is a difference. I finally opened the door, but only wide enough to hand them the envelopes waiting on the table. One envelope for him, one envelope for her. She snatched hers like it was a lifeline, but when she opened it, her face fell instantly. Inside was a restraining order banning both of them from contacting me directly. My son's envelope held the same, along with copies of the fraud report, bank notices, and a letter from my attorney stating clearly that any future attempt at accessing my finances would result in criminal charges. My son looked as if the ground had been pulled out from under him. "Mom, why are you doing this?" he whispered, as if he truly didn't understand the answer after months of abandonment, lies, and selfishness. I didn't yell. I didn't explain the inheritance. I didn't offer comfort. I simply said, "You showed me where I stand in your life. Now I'm showing you where you stand in mine." His wife gasped, clutching her envelope like a threat. My son reached out as if he might hold my hand, but stopping him was the easiest thing I've ever done. I closed the door gently, not slammed, not locked with fury, just closed. On the other side, I heard their world breaking. For the first time, they truly understood. They hadn't lost money. They had lost access to me. They had lost the right to call me mother. They had lost the future they assumed they deserved, and none of it was taken from them. They threw it away themselves. The morning after they stood on my porch, panicked, shouting, begging, I woke to a silence that felt completely different from the silence in that hospital room. This one wasn't empty. It wasn't lonely. It wasn't heavy. It was mine. It was a quiet that didn't ache, a quiet that didn't accuse, a quiet that didn't remind me of abandonment. It was the first quiet I'd felt in years that brought peace instead of pain. I made my coffee slowly, without rushing for anyone, without waiting for a call that never came, without hoping for a knock on the door that would never arrive from someone who cared. I stood by my window and watched the sunlight fall across the floorboards. It felt like a gentle reminder that life could still be simple if I chose it. And I finally understood. I didn't owe anyone the version of me that sacrificed everything and received nothing in return. That day, I met with my attorney. We finalized the restraining orders. We locked down every account, every document, every asset, every piece of the $38 million inheritance. My son and his wife would never touch a single cent, not even by accident. I placed everything into a trust with strict conditions that excluded them entirely. My attorney asked if I was sure. I was. After decades of giving all of myself, it was time to give something back. To me. Within a week, I left the town I'd lived in my entire adult life. I didn't sell the house. I donated it anonymously to a women's shelter, a place where mothers and daughters needed safety far more than my son ever offered me. Watching the workers tour the house, smiling with real gratitude, warmed something deep inside me. It felt like the first true act of healing I'd done for myself. I moved to a quiet coastal town my sister used to love. I bought a small cottage near the water. Nothing big or grand, just enough for me and the sound of the ocean. The first night I slept there, I left the windows open to listen to the waves. For the first time in years, I slept without waking up to worry. I slept without wondering why my son never called. I slept without waiting for someone who had already emotionally left my life long before I left theirs. I also began donating small portions of the inheritance, very carefully, to people who needed it. The hospital staff who held my hand when my son ignored me received holiday bonuses, anonymous gifts, and grants for training programs. A struggling student received a scholarship under my sister's name. A local food bank got enough funding to reopen a program they once had to shut down. Every dollar went somewhere meaningful, somewhere human, somewhere loving, but not one penny went to my son. Months passed before he tried again. He sent a short message. "Mom, we need to talk. It wasn't fair what you did." Fair. A word people use when they want the benefits of family without doing the work of loving one another. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I deleted it. Silence used to hurt me. Now it protected me. Now it was the wall standing between me and the people who had proven who they were. The world around me changed gently. I started reading again. I cooked meals for myself without setting an extra plate out of habit. I met neighbors who waved with warm smiles, not because they wanted anything, but because friendliness was natural to them. I walked along the beach in the mornings and sat on my porch at night. Healing didn't rush me. It moved like the tide, slow, steady, certain. And somewhere along that path, I realized something important. Losing my son wasn't the tragedy I thought it was. Losing the illusion of who he was, that was the real wound, and healing meant accepting that illusion was gone. I didn't hate him. I didn't resent him. I simply released him. Some people don't deserve the front row seats in your life. Some people don't even deserve standing room. One evening, months later, as I watched the sun sink behind the water, I understood the moral of everything I had lived through. Love is a gift, not a debt. Family is earned, not entitled. And the people who abandon you in your darkest moment should never be trusted with your light. I didn't just survive betrayal. I rebuilt a life where betrayal could no longer reach me. God didn't close that door to punish me. He closed it because the people behind it were never my family to begin with, and now I am finally free.